is Behind the Games from NewOverlords.com, where we seek creators of all kinds to find out what's behind our favorite games.
Avast, me hearties. This is Behind the Games. From our Midwest studio, I'm Jeff Illemek.
Oh, and I'm Seema from our Northeast studio.
Yes, I sort of
That was a
sprung
good start.
Avast on you there, Seema. And today we're joined by Brian Winn and Will Jeffery from the Will Winn Games studio. And I met this studio, and I met both these co-creators, co-founders of the studio and co-creators on this game that we're going to talk about at PAX East, which was a great time. There's an interesting origin story behind the game, so we're going to get into that. And there's an interesting game that's at the core of what's going on right now, too, Plunder Panic, that we'll be able to take a look at. So let's kick it off and say hi to Brian and Will. Brian, why don't you start it off with an introduction of yourself, and then we'll get Will, and we'll talk about the origin of the studio and the game as well.
Sure, yeah. My background, I'm a professor at Michigan State University. I've been here for quite some time, and we launched Will Winn Games. I think it was December of 2020, and so I'm a founder and president of Will Winn Games as well.
Excellent.
Yeah. Then ahoy! Hey, going with the pirate theme here. My name is Will Jeffery. I'm currently a course director at Full Sail University, teaching in their game design program. But I went up in the ranks at MSU. I was one of Brian's students at some point. And then ended up working there as an instructor, teaching in their game program, and attending MSU for undergrad and grad school for game design and development. So I've kind of done a little bit of everything there. Former Walt Disney Imagineer, and now I'm here in the Sunshine State and working on this with Brian and the rest of my team.
It sounds like you both are like living the dream.
Right.
Brian.
And I think we'll come back to that a little bit, too. I did notice the Imagineer element on your past history there in the past. That sounds fun. But I do want to get to the studio itself. And one of the really fun parts of learning about Will Winn Games and the studio and how you all got started is a theme that we've seen and heard from in a couple different ways. A definite twist on it, because it's sort of coming from you as instructors and the university playing a part. But this idea of games coming out of students and universities and student programs, multiple studios that we've talked to so far have sort of started that way. We talked to Lucia, who's the CEO of Total Mayhem, and they're making the We Were Here Forever series. They started as a group of students doing a school project. One of the professors got involved to help produce the game eventually. It started as this idea of, here's an interesting game, and it's so interesting, and there's such great reception, and this is something that we can sort of really turn into something real. It became a studio. Yours is a similar story with Will Winn Games, and I want to sort of start there. So why don't you talk about the origin story of the studio and the connection to the university and this idea of sort of where it's at and the mission behind it and sort of where it got started from that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it started kind of from a variety of angles. I direct a research and development lab at Michigan State University called the Games for Entertainment and Learning Lab, or the GEL Lab for short. And we founded that back in 2005. And, we do a lot of grant-based work, National Science Foundation, NIH, NASA, that sort of stuff. And, a lot of that is paid by taxpayer dollars. So the games that we create, have a research angle typically. But then, we typically, unlike a lot of research facilities, we actually put them out. So we'll put them on the app stores, put them for download, that sort of thing. But from time to time, we did other projects, that we thought had a commercial angle too, but we never really had a good pathway to bring those to market. And Plunder Panic is a good example of that, which we certainly we'll talk about more as we go along here. But so in talking to the university, it was like, well, how do we sign contracts with Nintendo, for example? How do we even sign contracts with Apple? University players and things like that are very adverse to, those sorts of contracts. So it became, somewhat of a necessity to think about like, well, how do we do this commercially? How do we spend things out? Is there a pipeline where we can create things in the university and then eventually bring them to market? So that was kind of one of the angles that we had, that sort of inspired what is now Will Winn Games. The other angle certainly was the student angle. We've got students that are, we have a top ranked program here at MSU. I think we're the #1 public university based on Princeton Review, #6 overall. And, so we're developing qualified, talented students, coming out, they work on a lot of projects, and, sometimes their projects could have additional legs, but a lot of those students don't know the business side. They don't know, how to spin up a studio, how to get things to market necessarily.
Right.
I mean, we teach some of that stuff, but they're very, green at it at, just graduating. And, and sometimes it's also difficult to get that first job. Everybody wants 5 years of experience. So, that was kind of another avenue that we had with Will Winn Games, was to provide a pathway, kind of the first step after school to get experience and potentially even take student projects and then, commercialize them in essence and bring them to market. And yeah, those were a couple of the big things. I guess the third one was Plunder Panic in itself. Will and I had worked on this project, and, it showed a lot of promise. And, we were trying to figure out how to bring it to market. Can we sell it to somebody or license it to somebody? And eventually we decided, like, hey, this is our baby. We need to bring it, all the way. So that was, kind of the third leg of what we were thinking, is like, hey, this is a great launch title for our studio.
So if you're a student looking to select a college and you want to be a game designer, would this be a plus for MSU, or like, is it in the literature anywhere? Do they know that that's going to be a potential sort of pipeline for them after graduation?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we're just kind of, we just developed a studio in the last year and a half. So certainly it will be in the literature. We've talked about
that's
it.
awesome.
But we'll continue to do that moving forward. And, from a program standpoint, we looked out at some of the other, competition. We're #6 overall. Like, what are the top 5 doing? And that's a common theme that we saw, is they had kind of a commercial branch or a good connection to industry, for a pipeline for students, and even a pipeline for, potential games.
So when you say 6, do you mean 6 as game design, or MSU in general is just 6th?
As game design, yeah. So Princeton
okay, that's fascinating.
Princeton Review does a review every year, I think since 2012. And we've been in the top 5 since the launch of that review program. So we're very, proud of that fact. And we started at, I think, something like 10 or 11, and then we've continually moved up in the rankings. And, 6 is 2022 rankings. We're #6.
Yeah, but #1 public university for game design is a pretty big feather in the cap too. So
yeah,
we don't want to sit on that one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one thing that Brian didn't fully mention is the opportunity that students have and that we have to identify the talent. The people that come in. When I worked at MSU, and as Brian is now, we at that time had a minor, so we had at least 2 years with students that we could identify, and we would teach classes with them. We'd see them for a long time. And we'd see students that had, tons of potential that we knew you'd lose to a Rockstar or a Blizzard or something one day. And we got to, we were fortunate that we could work with them in the gel lab for at least a year, but then we'd lose them out of state. So, this company served as, a way to encourage some of those folks who might not want to leave the state, or, ones that are jobs in the game market are difficult to get. So, it gave them that foot in the door, but it also allowed us to just identify that talent right away and say, hey, I know like 3, 4, 5 people right away that we could hire. Programmers, designers, artists, the game design program at MSU does everything. So it's pretty much a full pipeline and the ability to identify that talent. So it really put us in a unique and, pretty cool situation for Will Winn Games.
Yeah, that is really interesting. The idea of a Midwest game studio is compelling to me. I'm in the Midwest. This is
and there's a handful. There's more. It's just not as prevalent as we'd hope.
Right. And that's kind of what I was looking for, is to try to find what some of those top studios were. To see more studios starting up is interesting, for one. For two, I think there may even be more of an opportunity for studios to branch out and not have to be located in a particular place. We've seen and talked to multiple studios that are even going fully remote, and they've got people, all over the country or all over the world, and coming together and forming a studio, and they can work that way.
Yeah,
so
and that is how we
in
Yeah,
December
that's how we
2020 was
started.
in the heart of the pandemic. So we all were fully remote. And, Will continues to be fully remote down in Florida. But we do have an office here now. And most of us come into the office every now and then. And, that's valuable as well for kind of community building and access to hardware. So we have dev kits for all the major platforms. And, that's a unique piece of hardware that we need to, physically be at.
Yeah, let's mesh this together. So let's also describe the game now here for a couple minutes, because then we can come back to how the studio works, because you're doing some really ambitious things across many platforms and many many tool sets, which would require something like that, which is something maybe we can explore. So let's just
for sure.
describe the game for a couple minutes, and then I'll even chime in with my thoughts, because I've played it and experienced it, and it's a really fun little experience. And I think it has the potential to really be a big thing as well. So start there, and then
sure.
and then we'll toss that around and talk about the challenges and opportunities.
Sure.
Yeah.
Will, do you want to take that? I'll talk a little bit about the backstory, at some point.
Yeah. So Plunder Panic is a swashbuckling action arcade game. It's up for 12 players, and essentially it's two rival crews, and they're battling for supremacy on the high seas. And the main thing about it is it started out as an arcade game with up to 12 players, and it was refactored for online play. So you can play this both locally and online. And it's a game that's all about teamwork, trying to accomplish one of multiple objectives and getting it done very quickly before the other team can. So, you're pirates, so you're stealing gold and you're trying to sink the enemy ship or take out the enemy captain. And whichever team captures their objective first wins. It's done in a retro, 16-bit art style, so it's kind of this blend of classic games of the SNES that maybe a decent amount of our team, fewer now, grew up playing, on the SNES, but sort of a love letter to those old couch co-op experiences or those multiplayer games that we grew up and played. You've got, your Smash TV or your Nidhogg, as newer games, art styles blending from Metal Slug, to Zelda, any 16-bit or high pixel animation sort of game, but we're trying to make it that retro feel but modernized, where people can dive in and really explore the game and have that kind of ease of user experience. It's all about these quick matches, so games last maybe a minute to 2 minutes on average. It's meant to be played multiple times, with tournament modes and different modify Rs, because of course it's got pirate puns in there, tons of items that you can turn on and off. So we really wanted to put in a lot of customization for, hundreds of gameplay combinations. It's just something that you could get together and play with your friends, whether it's on your couch or a collection of couches and online. We wanted something that, encouraged the shouting, the laughing, the, finger poking, and that sort of thing. Personally for me, I had a lot of fun with even the Jackbox games, just playing with family, people that normally wouldn't play a game with us, but you could introduce them to an experience and say hey, this is really fun, you should try it. And they get in and they're having a blast. So we wanted to make something that wasn't necessarily aimed at the core gamers, something that did have a little bit more of a casual introduction to it. So your kids can play, their friends who might not be gamers, older, their parents join in and play with them, because it's not too complicated of a game. There's a lot going on. It's called Plunder Panic for a reason. It's not Plunder Calm, but it's something that people can jump into and really, get their hands on. And then as they're getting more used to the experience, that's when, they can enable some harder stuff and, really get into the higher tier strategies, that sort of thing.
Right. There is a surprising amount of depth there. So it's a single screen and up to 12. It could be as few as 2. Yep. Or one person playing against an AI, and I even tried that. Just my one little character against one other little character. But that idea of up to 12 and 6v6 and that party feel is really prevalent, and very quick rounds and shuffle the teams. That kind of feel built into it. Let's just switch it up. Let's do multiple rounds, best of 3, best of 5, best of 7, however we want to do it. There's multiple options as far as that goes. And then the feel of that retro arcade feel to the sound, the retro arcade feel to the mechanics of the action of the sprites, and the art style makes it really accessible too. But there is a surprising amount of depth. So there's
and that's
not,
by design,
right? It's not just to fight. It's not just like a brawl. And in fact, that would be the least interesting way to go about getting through those 2-3 minute rounds. is just a brawl. We're gonna fight each other. There's a cannon that you can kind of control in the center of the screen and blast the other ship. There's a handful of win conditions where you're trying to basically sink the other person's ship, and you're getting all 6 of your players to work together to pick up treasure, light the cannon, move the rowboat, and do all
and take out the enemy captain.
Yeah.
And take out the enemy captain, which is only slightly harder, but harder than taking out a regular player, and get through that round. The low barrier of entry will bring anyone in at any time. It feels like it's definitely designed for a controller, so I'll ask about that in just a second too. I played it with a keyboard, but I was looking for my controller immediately to get that feel to it. But I think it would be really fun for groups in that way to get them together in that party environment and play.
Yeah. There's a design mantra that we had we've used in the past. It's just like easy to learn, difficult to master. And Brian and I have done that in a handful of games that we worked on together in projects. And I think that serves as a really good design philosophy of like, we need to make the barrier of entry low, especially if we're trying to attract all sorts of ages to this game. But once they do get hooked, they're discovering through organic gameplay all of these little things. They see other people do strategies, then they try it. They're playing around and discovering item interactions and little things that they can do here on their ship, and then in the level, and then this level does this, and that level has this little secret item and secret area. So it was really fun to kind of design that into it to really keep it accessible, but at the same time, we still play it 4 or 5 years later, and we're having a blast and still developing new strategies. So maybe it speaks to the longevity of the design.
Now, Brian, you started to mention the sort of the origin of the idea. Why don't you talk about that for a second, then we'll...
Yeah, and it kind of ties into what we're talking about as well. We were basically running this game showcase at the Traverse City Film Festival, which is, in Traverse City, Michigan. Michael Moore puts on this festival every year. And, Michigan State had, kind of where they called out to us and said, like, hey, we know you've got a game development program. Would you host this interactive showcase like they do at many other film festivals? So we did it a couple years, and of course MSU, put a lot of money into it, supporting travel and lodging and things like that. And they said, hey, you're showing a lot of games there, including some of your own. Since we're putting so much money into this, why don't we show more MSU and make it really kind of an MSU branded thing to show all the awesome work that students are doing and that you're doing in the Gel Lab and so forth. So that was kind of our call out from our university president. So kind of going into that festival, I think it was 2017. We were pulling together all the projects that we had been working on, and we're like, we really need something that is a center of our showcase. Something that brings the audience in, gets them shouting, turns heads, attracts people over to, what is that noise? What are people shouting about? And, so we had basically about 2.5 months until this, this upcoming festival. And Will and I went out to lunch, and, we were talking about this, and, Will kind of at the same time, I think, announced that he gave a year notice. He's like, I'm moving to Florida in a year. And I was like, well, not too many people give a year notice.
So it's a long notice.
It's a long notice. But I was like, we the stars were aligned. I was like, we should do a passion project. Let's do something that's a showcase piece for the Traverse City Film Festival. Let's do something that you and I enjoy, the type of game that we want to make, not just, a learning game or those sorts of things that we typically do in the Gel Lab. So, we just on a napkin, we kind of started to spitball the idea of this game, what it was going to be like, what the win conditions, I think we had at least 3 out of the 4 win conditions out of that lunch meeting.
Brian was real into pirates. I knew you wanted to do pirates, and that definitely lent us to, there's a couple themes that you can lean on pretty heavy. You're like, okay, gold and ships, the game designed itself.
Exactly. And, so we went back and really rapid prototyping with students in the Gel Lab. We had a very micro budget to support this. We got a little bit of money from the university to put this together. And about 2 weeks before, the Traverse City Film Festival, we're like, hey, this game is really fun. I think it's, we need to not just have it on a laptop. It needs to show better than that. So
I still can't believe that this happened.
Yeah,
I can't believe it got pulled together so quickly.
I was actually out for a walk with my wife, and we were, I was brainstorming ideas with her, and she's like, why don't you build it into like a rum barrel? We were talking about like a barrel because it's, it's circular and players can round it, and we could have multiple screens. And we're talking about maybe like a ship's wheel on the top of the barrel with controllers mounted. We couldn't pull that part off in that short of time, but I actually found a local furniture manufacturer that developed things out of rum barrels and wine barrels. And, he's like, I contacted him and said what we wanted to do. And he's like, well, I've got a big long list of projects, but this sounds super awesome. So I on the back burner and work really hard for a week to put this together for you. So we with him and put it together and, got the rum barrel made. And I got all the equipment, anchored into it. Will, you're going to say?
Yeah, I remember kind of how this happened. I was working and Brian was, like you said, he was on a walk. I remember getting a text earlier in the day saying like, hey, I think we should make this into an arcade cabinet. And I'm kind of like laughing like, yeah, okay. And then 2 hours later, like, hey, I met with this guy who makes rum barrels and he could do it. And I'm like, yeah, okay. It's like, when do we need this? Like, 2 weeks. And it's like, all right. And I kind of like pushing it away. And then, by the end of the day, he's like, yeah, this guy says he'll do it and it won't cost that much. I think we're going to do it. So it all happened really, really quickly. And the hilarious part about it is we had this barrel, I think it was actually a bourbon barrel.
Yeah.
That, is like a legit one that had bourbon in it. So the inside is still charcoal. And I had to drive this barrel with a bunch of students in a van to Traverse City, and it smelled like bourbon, and I had students with me. And I said, if we get pulled over, you have to tell everyone that's everything is above the law here. We're just transporting a barrel. But it all happened so quick. But it was so cool to see it come together because, like Brian said, it's a showpiece, and it's not just a laptop on a desk that people are kind of crowding around. It's a legit arcade cabinet, like something you've never seen. It, a real cask barrel with big pole sail and huge TVs mounted on it. And we had treasure chests with LEDs that have the controllers coming out on either side to really play up the red team and the blue team. So it really is a sight to behold. And it's, it's still there. It still exists. It's in Michigan.
Yeah, so, we brought it to Traverse City Film Festival, and it showed really well. I mean, it did exactly what we wanted to do. It brought in people, they were shouting, yelling, they were teaming up, they were coming back. It was like a 4 or 5 day festival, and we would have, players come back every day, and they're like, this is the best thing at the festival. We came for the films, but, we're coming back for the games. At the end of the festival, we're like, we think we really have something here. We, kind of threw it together, rapid prototyping, but if we take some time with this, maybe it can go somewhere. So we ended up submitting it to Indiecade and being accepted to show it there. We won the Audience Choice Award, so that was out in Los Angeles. We also submitted it to South by Southwest in a game pitch competition and was a finalist in that competition. We also got accepted to Indie Mega Booth at PAX East and showed it there. This is all back in 2018.
Yeah, 2017 and 2018.
Yeah, 2017, 2018. Yeah. And kind of out of that, we're like, hey, we've kind of done the rounds now. We've won some awards. We think that this has definite commercial viability. How do we do that? How do we bring it to market? And that's when we started to explore with the university. And of course, their initial thing was like, oh, can we license it to Nintendo? Or can we, license it to EA? Right. They just look at the big heavyweights and are like, hey, maybe we can license it. And then, they're having.
Yeah, they really didn't have any experience.
But
they didn't have experience working with those companies, so it was very much like, oh yeah, we know Nintendo, so that's how this works, right? You just send it to them and they'll make the game. They're like,
the Nintendo.
No, that's not how it works. and we had worked with them in the past, not Nintendo, but MSU, where contracts are involved with outside companies, and it was just so much red tape and a really slow process that it didn't seem viable for all the pivots and twists and turns and rapid iteration that we were going to need to do as a company to make this a reality with the game. So unfortunately, for a while, we just had this version that was kind of sitting shelved that we didn't have anything we could do with until COVID hit, and that's sort of where the story begins.
Yeah, like I said, Will had given his year notice, so he moved off to Florida and was working for Disney, and we still had this game we put it down in the lobby of our building here at MSU, and people are like, oh, that's awesome. You won awards. It's a cool game. It'd be great to get it out on a console. So, and so it kind of sat there for a year. as we were exploring how do we do this, and eventually it was like, hey, we need to start a company around this, kind of the things that I mentioned before, at least those 3 pillars I mentioned earlier. COVID hit, of course, and right as we were exploring starting this company, and we had at that point basically decided that we should do this. We had brought Will on as a contractor to kind of help steer the ship, if you will, and we realized that we had a great game, but it was a local multiplayer game where it required up to 12 players in the room. I mean, you could do 1 versus 1, but
kind of the worst case COVID scenario for a game design.
Exactly.
What we should do is put everybody and cram them on a couch right next to each other and then yell at each other real close like. We're like, I don't think that's gonna work.
Yeah, at the beginning, of course, you couldn't even have parties with more than like 5 people or whatever from different households.
Yeah, the stay-at-home orders and all that.
Yeah,
but it was kind of a blessing in disguise at the same time because we were all working remotely at the time. Me with Full Sail and Brian at MSU, and so much of the world was changing to remote work, and we said like, hey, we might be able to make this into something. Like we could make something happen here. We're all working from home anyways, so what if we formed a remote company and see if we can get this thing off the ground? And it, here we are.
This is interesting. There's the kernel of the idea, and then this need and opportunity for what might work well for the students in the university, and how you could put a thing together there. And then putting that together and building a studio out of it seems like a natural idea, and that seemed brilliant, and start up the studio. But I think, and this is what would be interesting then to sort of describe to people the journey that happens from that point of, as you say, bringing a game to market. And bringing the game to market, as there's a lot that goes into that. And you even took it quite a bit further, and we'll talk about sort of all the pieces you're bringing together, and then what that potentially needed to do for you to build out the studio and the people and the resources and the expertise and the physical space and the physical tools, because a local game, a great local game, and even the showpiece that you built with the rum barrel, which I would still love to sort of see, to get that into the business relationship in various stores, to get that to a point where, as you started looking at, and ultimately where it's at now, where you're taking it online with online matchmaking, to get that where it can potentially be working on consoles. Those are some big leaps. So why don't you talk about that for a second, about what that roadmap looked like for you originally, and how daunting that may have seemed, and then how you started lining up those pieces to be able to get that journey to bringing it to market from, hey, here's a cool game that we could sort of show off and people love.
Yeah, it actually started at MSU. Yeah. We built the original game. Like I mentioned, it was a rapid, 2 to 3 month prototype. It was sort of a 8-bit retro game at that point. And, as we were doing Indiecade and additional things coming up, we knew that we needed to kind of up the ante. So we continued to invest in it, and we, brought out version 2 of the game, which was like a 16-bit retro game. And we actually, after South by Southwest and PAX East, we pitched it to Nintendo and got approval to bring it to Switch. So that was kind of our first foray into kind of like thinking about doing something commercial. But we didn't really know the vehicle at that point of how we're actually going to do it. At that time, we thought, maybe we could actually do it through MSU, through the Gel Lab, or maybe we needed to, find somebody else to actually publish it for us. But once we, kind of a couple years down the road, started Will Winn Games, that's when we realized that we needed to be truly internet multiplayer. So, we decided that at that point we needed to pivot and create a fully internet multiplayer game. We needed to hit the major platforms out there. So pretty quickly we pitched it to Microsoft to bring it to Xbox, and we pitched it to PlayStation, of course, to bring it to PlayStation. And, surprisingly, that process was not that hard. We actually got accepted very quickly across all those platforms. And I think the awards that we had won and those sorts of things really helped us.
Yeah, and having been accepted on Nintendo already definitely didn't hurt our chances. The one console doesn't want to show that, they've already got it, and it doesn't want to be exclusive. So the other ones are like, I want in on this too. So, I'm thinking that helped us in the process.
I think one of the I think we went into the process a bit naive, though, about like what it would take to take our local multiplayer game and make it truly internet multiplayer. We thought, it's going to take us, 3 to 6 months to do that, in a couple months to port to the platforms. It ended up taking us much longer to really get our game into a commercial state. I say our first 2 versions were proof of concept prototypes, and then we had to actually build it. And we essentially, once we started Will Winn Games, we ended up rebuilding the game from the ground up. Like everything is different than what was, the MSU version of the game.
Sure.
Yeah. And to be fair, the version that we had finished at MSU, when we were talking about this originally and saying, let's put this to market, we thought you could sell it and some people would buy it and it would be fun just to get it out there. But then, at one point, Brian messaged me and said, like, maybe we don't want to just get this out there. Like, I think this is really special and I want it to sell really well. Like, I think we need to put in internet multiplayer. And that changed when we originally pitched this company and these ideas and we were talking about it. That wasn't in the cards. That wasn't what we originally went with. And it just became sort of like, yeah, I think this is what we need to do to truly be successful, to put this out here and turn this into something bigger, to turn our studio into something bigger. So what started as like Brian, myself, the original programmer working like quarter time with us and kind of like piecemeal putting this together turned into, hey, we need to hire up. We need to get more folks in. We need to get a team together because this is turning into a larger endeavor than what we really had scheduled for.
I was going to say, how do you decide when a pivot like that is the right thing to do or if it's just more churn,
Yeah, I think looking at the competition was one. We were just playing games and it was in the middle of COVID and we're just like, missing human interaction and, we're thinking about what we do. And it's like, well, I was playing Deep Rock Galactic online with my buddies and, it's like I'm playing this online game with my friend on my phone. And, it was just a lot of, that's how you're connecting with people. Like we're doing maybe you've even done this, but did you do Jackbox parties over Zoom with people?
Mm-hmm.
That's what consisted of parties at that point. So it was like, what if we could do this game that is fun over the internet so we can still have this experience? And, was it going to cost way more? Yes. Was it going to be a ton more work? Yes. Did we underestimate it? Yeah, probably. But
maybe that was a good thing.
Yeah, and it just felt necessary. I'm one of those, I'm reluctant at first. It takes me a little while to come around to big work ideas of like, hey, we need to refactor. And I'm like, no, we don't.
That would be me.
After sitting on it for a week, it was like, yeah, I know you're right. I don't like it, but I know you're right.
Because not only did you go from local to fully online, you also decided to support every console.
And
every PC
platform.
and Steam. And Steam,
well,
yeah.
The whole product changed and you have to look at the landscape out there and say like, what do other games offer? What are people going to look at and say, hey, this is enough for me to purchase it? What, as a consumer, what would I buy? What would attract me to your experience? So it was less just let's make it online and more of what do we need to be considered like a legit product? We don't want to be seen as like, hey, here's this like little university spin-off company that put out kind of a shoddy game. Like, how do we be seen as a legit studio? How do we be seen as someone who created like a really awesome experience? What does it need to get there to, be rated well, to be popular?
The studio itself is still growing. It's still relatively small. How many people total
do you
people sort of have right now?
Yeah.
Okay. So a good number of people. As you started to look at those these new challenges, did you have to go and like seek out this expertise? Did you develop it yourselves? I mean, having the powerhouse of GEL and MSU, and you have been teaching and instructing and knowing the games industry for many years, had to be a huge strength. But what did you do to get like the online multiplayer expertise of how do I do that, and the porting to the consoles? How do I do that?
Yeah, so our game was built, around the Unity game engine, which a lot of indie games are, and so we started to explore like, well, how do we do this? Do we write it from scratch? Do we, find a plugin or an add-on to Unity that will support it? This is before Unity had their new multiplayer thing that just came out, and so we looked around. We found Photon, which is a technology that a lot of games will use, but we didn't think it was going to really work for us. But as we were exploring their website, we're like, oh, they have this other product that is kind of their high-end product, which, they said it was made for brawlers and that sort of game. And we're like, that seems to be something more down the line of what we need. It was called Quantum. So we contacted them. It's Exit Games. It's a company out of Germany. And, had a conversation with them, and it really seemed like, hey, maybe this is the solution for us. And, at the time, they maybe oversold it a little bit, and like, you
they
port
pitched
your
it pretty
game
hard.
in, a couple months, and like I said, it ended up being a complete rewrite. So it definitely took longer than a couple of months. And, it's the type of thing that there isn't a lot of expertise out there. There isn't a lot of like forum posts about how to use this. But they had great support on the other hand. So we had to basically build the expertise in-house. I mentioned one of the legs was to give students the first step after they graduate. We had several great students that worked in the gel lab that had graduated. They hadn't found a job yet. So, we reached out to them and said, hey, we've got this great opportunity. And, we started to build our studio that way. So we brought in 4 programmers. Ultimately, we brought in a sound designer, which actually is a programmer as well. He was the original sound designer on Plunder. We brought in an artist that was one of our artists on Plunder. And then we kind of kept building from there.
Yeah, and this didn't all happen at once. This was over time. So, when we first ported this to online, it really was just the original programmer working quarter time with us. It was Alex working with us, and then he had a buddy who he worked with who wanted to dabble in games, and they kind of worked together a little bit. And to be fair, we had a version of the game up and running in like a month that was ported. And it was, not the full version, but it was conceptually there and it was working in their systems. So that part went faster. But I think the area that we didn't put as much time into is, it's not just as easy as saying now this game is online. You have to redesign the experience, the connectivity, the user experience, lobbies and matchmaking and the customization and hosts and clients and all of that. And that was all the stuff that, we didn't have designs for. We made this all as a local system. So we not only had to create that functionality, but there's a lot of iteration that we hadn't gone through yet because it was a local only experience. And that's part of what made this, timeline keep extending and it take a little bit longer. It was new territory for us that we had to prove out. And when we launched this game originally in September of 2021, it was in early access on Steam. That really served as this great test bed for us, where we had beta testers who had been following us since PAX or even before they saw us at IndieCade. We had people that, said, we want this game, and now they could finally get it on PC, and they'd be giving us feedback. They still do. So it was a lot of this community engagement of, talking with our members and saying, what do you like about this? We're trying to design this around you to make it easier for you to play. What are some features that you're excited about? What are some features that would ease the pain that you might have in some of the other games that you play? And they've been vital to the experience. They've provided some really excellent ideas and concepts and tests that we put together, and our product has been better for it.
That's interesting. The idea of having that kind of community to bounce ideas off of and to interact with and watch the game develop. One of the things that we've talked to a couple of game companies, and some of this is either handled in-house or handled through a PR company, but the communication with the community as the game develops seems to be a really important part of getting a game off the ground and getting a studio off the ground. That fan base will help both provide the feedback, provide the energy around communication and the social networking, help the game get a base of players going. I would imagine, and this is something that is maybe drove the introduction of artificial the AI players in. I imagine when you've got this idea of 12 versus 12, that's a lot of people to
6v6.
Or this, sorry, 6v6. 12 people total. That's a lot
Maybe
of people.
Maybe Plunder 2 will be 12v2, 12v12.
That would be crazy. That would be amazing. But to make a multiplayer game like that, you do need a bunch of people around. So that probably also was maybe an opportunity when you said, "Oh, we're going to take this online," and now you don't all have to be in the same room. We can grab people from all over the place. So that makes a lot of sense. Grabbing this expertise from multiple places, grabbing a platform, developing your spin on how you're going to use that tool set to bring a game to market and bring it to multiplayer and bring it online. I would imagine that in your minds, that might be now a tool that you have under your belt for the future, for what else you can do now to build on top of that.
Yeah.
As studio
sure.
leads, are you kind of like thinking along those lines of like, okay, now we've got that tool in our tool belt. Now we've got this tool in our tool belt.
That experience, I think, and Brian could speak to this too, that's the biggest part for us is we had shipped things on the App Store and, iOS and Android and put stuff out for VR, but we hadn't put something out on console. That was the experience that we hadn't had is getting those dev kits, going through the process. That was the biggest unknown, that and the marketing side were really the biggest unknowns for our company. And what we've learned, where it can be very frustrating at times, is invaluable. How long that process will take, the ins and outs of, PlayStation's backend and Nintendo's and Xboxes and the differences and the rules you need for crossplay. Those are all things that are, very gated to new developers. And unless you're working with a publisher, you don't have access to that information. It's very hard to learn about that unless you have, a mentor or you're working somewhere and you gain that institutional knowledge elsewhere. So I think it has been difficult, but, our team is eager and intelligent and hardworking. And, we've tried to overcome those challenges. It's taken longer than we wanted, but we've come out the other side knowing, hey, the next project, we know how to budget this. We know some of the hardships that we would encounter. So yeah, it's definitely a hard part of this.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I think we are building a tool chest. We're building, software that we can reuse, systems that we can bring into our future titles. We're bringing in knowledge and experience, of course. We've also developed a lot of documentation and checklists and things like that we can reuse on the next project. Of course, the game industry, everything's always changing. There'll be the next, PS6 coming out or whatever, that everything's going to probably end up changing. But at least, for our next title, we'll have a lot of great things that we can leverage moving forward.
Well, I just want to say, you keep saying how long it took you, but to do all that in 2 years seems incredibly nimble to me.
It just feels like a long time, I guess. It was 2017, when we first started the project.
Right, but I'm thinking of when it was local in December of 2020 to where you are today.
Yeah.
And that's a good point. I think we would be better off remembering that and trying to, take a deep breath and say, hey, we really have come a long way in a short period of time. And I've said this to my team before when they're getting frustrated with documentation or something that's not working on a console. Like, let's take a pause. Let's play the game a little bit. And it's a breath of fresh air because you're like, this is pretty cool. Like, as a package,
it reminds
as a full
you.
game.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like there's a reason why we're doing this. This is fun. We're having a good time. And, just not too long ago, this thing didn't work, or this system wasn't there, or this whole game wasn't finished. And the amount that we've been able to do with what we have resources wise is really impressive. And Brian can speak to this in great detail, but that was kind of the mantra of the Gel Lab. It was like, how much can we do with this product? Like, how much can we blow someone away with a shoestring budget? How can we make a really cool product with really very few resources? It felt like the game program in the beginning when I was there, that's kind of what we were up against. It was, how can we prove everybody wrong with limited resources and blow them away? And, we kind of took that and threw that into our studio.
I think it prepared us well for indie game dev because, I think most indies are shoestring budget as we have been. I mean, we were fortunate enough that we got a little bit of kickoff funding, from the MSU Foundation. And then, like most indies, we had to, beg, borrow, and steal to get the resources. We did friends and family fundraising, investing our own money, because, we were hiring these students and, they're coming out of college. They don't have resources. So we have to pay them, of course, to survive. And, we got an office space. We're buying hardware, equipment. We went to PAX East. All those things ended up, costing money. And when the timeline, our initial timeline was, we thought we could bring it to market in, we really got started in January 2021. We thought we'd be to market by September 2021, which we were in early access, but we were kind of setting up our budgets and timelines based on that, and then revenue would start pouring in. And I think, as a lot of people have discovered, you don't get great visibility on Steam early access, and meaning you don't get a lot of revenue at that point. So our timeline just ended up getting extended, so we can have this full release. So we're going to be basically about a year in early access, which I think is actually pretty good for a lot of indie companies out there.
Yeah.
I think so. I think you've accomplished a great deal.
Of course, we'll be leaving early access in the next, little bit, by our drop dead date really is Talk Like a Pirate Day, September 19th, 2022 here.
Oh, brilliant.
But we're hoping to get out before that, in August, perhaps.
Well, that's the fun fact. For early access, we dropped on Talk Like a Pirate Day 2021. So we're like, ooh, it could be kind of fun to release the game again on Talk Like a Pirate Day 2022. So we've been working on our pirate jokes just in case.
I like that. I didn't go as far as I was maybe going to there in the intro, but I love the kind of Talk Like a Pirate. Arr, avest me hearties, and I've got my pirate voice ready to go. So
when you kind of have to do it.
When you're ready,
it's required.
I'll maybe I'll inject a little bit of that of my own in. Which reminds me, and this it came out great, but I loved. We were watching it again last night. We were watching your trailers, and in the trailers, if you just watch it the first time through the trailer really quick, you might not notice along the way, but it flashes between scenes of the game and then scenes of people playing the game in various environments, and it's really done well to sort of show the breadth of, if you're watching closely, of who can play it and how you can play it and how you can play together. There's a group of kids on a couch. There's a family playing together. There's a guy alone in a conference room with a whiteboard behind him. Which
that's our CEO, Matt.
I just love that. I love that idea. But then slowly throughout this 2-minute trailer, as it's showing gameplay footage and as it's showing them play, they slowly become pirates.
Right. They're like poking at their consoles with a hook hand.
And the controller with a hook by the end. And I think it was, you said, one of your developers who became a parrot.
A parrot.
Yeah, that was a real missed opportunity. We were going to take that to PAX and wear a big parrot suit and rotate it every day. But we ultimately decided against it.
I think rotating a costume every day sounds like a bad idea. So
maybe at the end of the day,
it was probably a good
maybe it was the right
call.
idea, but it could have been fun. So instead at PAX, we all had pirate hats and pirate garb and stuff like that. Did you guys see the injury lawyer trailer?
No, I have not. No. I did not see that one.
You are missing out.
On Steam?
Yeah, it is on Steam. The same person, Dan Hartley, who worked on this commercial with us, the original one, we were just sitting in a meeting pitching ideas, and I don't remember how it came to it, but we were just coming up with goofy stuff, spitballing, and someone said, like, what if there was like a, those lawyer injury commercials where they say 1-800-CALL-SAM, and it talks about that. He's like, what if Swabby was an injury lawyer?
Pirates.
And we were like, what? And he said, no, it'll be great. And it was like, someone gets hit by a kraken and someone is getting sued for stealing all their money, and it'll be hilarious. And we're like, yeah, okay, that's an idea. It sounds funny. I don't know how the heck you're going to do it. And he's like, oh, we'll just make the regular commercial and I'll do this one on the side. I think I can do it. It'll be great. And then, at one point he sent it to us and I was like, this is the funniest thing that I've seen in a long time. This is hilarious. And we'll have to send it to you. It's great. But yeah, it's on Steam. It's got Swabby as an injury lawyer, and all these pirates are suing other pirates for, getting stabbed and getting their ship attacked by Poseidon and things like that. It's a lot of fun.
That idea of putting together the trailer and the marketing aspect, that's another thing that's very difficult for indie companies. And oftentimes they have to like hire a PR firm or hire a marketing firm and try to get that expertise. Being able to pull on your network of resources that you've both gathered and still probably connected to through the programs that you worked on and how you've been working, that has to have been a great strength for you at this point, I would think. So you knew the cinematographer. Was that an example you were describing?
Yeah. Dan, he was actually, he did our original trailer for back at MSU for the original Plunder Panic. the 8-bit version. And, we kept connected to him. He was very much a gamer and involved in, talking about games, and had his own little podcast for a while about games. And, when we came to making the trailer, we, said, hey, he's our guy. So we brought him in. We were able to get some business accelerator funds to bring him in, through the state of Michigan. We try to leverage as much as we can. Once again, I mentioned beg, borrow, and steal. Any resource that we can get our hands on to leverage and go farther, faster. We've done that. So the business accelerator funds are really helpful to bring him in, support him to create our trailers, and some of our, I guess, viral marketing that we're putting out there.
It's just an example of another one of those things that people who are dreaming of getting into developing a game or starting with the idea of a studio, that they need to understand and research and put on their list. There's all of these aspects of not only the tools and the technology and the idea and the design, and then the sound engineering and the art but there's the marketing, and there's the financing, and there's the business, and then there's the relationship with the consoles and the publishing platforms. The publishing being very different than development. It's as Seema says, it is so much work that you all have done in the past couple of years. I certainly do not underestimate what's gone on and the effort that has gone into that, and still going into it. I mean, it's amazing that you're going to all of these platforms all at once as well, and cross-play across these platforms. That has to be, in my mind, that's hugely daunting. We've
kind of joked that it's like the hard mode of game design, and we didn't really know that
going
into it.
Hard mode, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like, all right, what's the hardest thing you could do? Well, every platform at once with crossplay and online multiplayer and multiple controllers. And we're like, yeah, check. So. Yeah. And self-publishing, yeah. And, as an indie developer, something that you kind of have to teach your students is like, yeah, you need exposure to all those other areas, because the smaller the studio that you're at, the more hats you're going to have to wear. So, at the early days, I was doing social media, and I was doing video editing and early website stuff, because you couldn't afford to bring it out to other people. And it's like, is it my area? No. Do I know enough to be dangerous? Yeah, but if I could hire someone, I would, but where's the money better spent? And those are kind of the things you learn along the way of like, what can we get away with doing ourselves? And then who do we need to lean on to really take this to the next level? And that's some of the areas that come with experience, saying like, yeah, that whole Dunning-Kruger effect. You don't know how bad you are at something because you just don't understand the breadth of what it takes.
But sometimes you put those kind of constraints around a problem, and you can do amazing things even more than if you had unlimited budgets. And sometimes you get further down the road. And also, a little bit of ignorance isn't necessarily a bad thing. I'm a marathon runner. And I've run many marathons. I ran over a dozen marathons. And I also have done a few triathlons, and I have been around a bunch of people who have done Ironman triathlons. And there was a common theme for people that were training in triathlons and going to potentially do an Ironman triathlon, and they're training up for it. And people new to it, or that were going to do their first Ironman, they would say, should I go off and run a marathon first? Should I get good at understanding how to just run the marathon? Because you have to run a full marathon as part of the Ironman. And the experts, the people that had done it before, would say, no. Don't do that. Because a little bit of the ignorance of what the challenges of that part of it is actually going to help you get done. You just got to go and do it. So if you just go and do it, just go tackle that big thing. Go do the hard mode thing, then you'll have your hard mode thing done, because you're doing it to get this thing done. If you take too much time to spend all of this effort on one thing, you could actually end up hurting yourself in order to get that overall achievement done. So if you had taken just one console and one thing at one time and not been online, or not all of these small steps along the way, it could have been a 10-year journey to even get to the point where you are today.
Yeah.
There's a lot of truth to what you're saying. If we knew how ridiculous it was walking into it, who knows how we would have approached it. You don't know that you're necessarily in hard mode. You're just doing it. And our team just leapt in with both feet. We're like, all right, we're gonna push it to PlayStation. Let's just go. Let's look at the documentation and just start working on it. And
how hard can it be? There's tons of games.
And along the way, you discover things that are like, yeah, this is tough. But then there are a lot of areas where it's like, yeah, we did that, and it just took that time. It took the time. It took experience. It took wherewithal to just wake up every day and give it a shot and approach it from new perspectives. And I think there is some trouble, some areas for improvement when you have a new team who doesn't have that experience, who hasn't gone through some of this before, that you've got to manage their frustration, their self-esteem. They're like, they can get downtrodden by what's happening, the system, the bugs. And, some of what you're doing, some of what I do as the producer, project managers, kind of coaching and just like trying to keep an even keel of emotions and say like, hey, take a step back, take a breath. This is not an unsolvable problem. We're not the first company out there putting out a game. Right. We're not the only multiplayer game that exists. And, there's an aspect of that too. So, with where we get to identify new talent and work with these young up and coming superstars, there is a real person, inexperienced aspect to it where you're trying to turn them into those seasoned developers who don't get rattled by something that comes along and, throws off their day. And that's been good too. There's challenges there, but it's been an interesting experience.
That has to be an interesting part of it for both of you, and especially coming from the perspective of people that have been educating students for so long, being able to sort of take it to the next level. And now they're no longer students, but now they're professionals, and continuing to be able to help them develop as professionals is extending that time that you get to see people that you're coaching and working with and team members grow. That has to be incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, it's one of the, I had just finished actually playing Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, if you're familiar.
Yep.
And I the credits were rolling, and then one of my former students, Nick Thurston, popped up as like, the UI lead or whatever he was designing on that one. And
that must
every
be a
time
moment.
I see a former, yeah, and I've had that over the years, because I've had the fortune just with Brian of working with some of the most talented, wonderful people. People on Halo and Destiny and like big games, and getting to see their names. And every time I see one of their names, I send them a message like, hey, I just finished this. This was awesome. Thinking about you, great work. And, it's just, they say like game design is, a small family sometimes. And it can be like that, especially if you continue to foster those relationships. And, we care deeply about our students. We worked with them for years, and they were like, they weren't just students. They became friends. They became colleagues, especially working with them in the gel lab. And, being in, day out, sometimes those crunch nights, which, you don't want to have those, but you get through it together. And it's really great to see them go off and accomplish such big things. And, it's rewarding. You live vicariously through them sometimes, but, hopefully they'll get our game and see our name in the credits and then send us a message too.
Yeah.
Now we're industry, colleagues as well. So, we not only teach, but we can do it. Sometimes they say those can't do it, teach,
right.
But I think we're proving that wrong here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it reinvigorates you too. You can pull from it in your lectures. You talk about design lessons and experience on the consoles and publishing and metrics you put in your game. So, it is professional development is a real thing in academia, and there's nothing better than making a game to give you some professional development or burn you out. I don't know, maybe a little bit of both.
Right. Okay, so here you are. You're in early access. We've got you're down this roadmap of getting it out on all these consoles. You've got Plunder Panic, and now you have this wonderful studio with a lot of these really powerful pieces in place. So if we think about Will Winn Games and we think about what's the sort of going on out into the future, what are your ideas there? What are your thoughts? What are the moonshots that are in the back of your head? Where do you potentially either want to take Plunder Panic and take that after release, or is there something else that's sort of floating around in your mind?
Well, we can't talk about unannounced projects.
Right.
Just kidding.
No, absolutely. No, yeah.
It rhymes with Runder Rannick Roo.
But we always viewed Plunder as our inaugural launch title. It's not like a one and done thing. We're not just starting the studio to release Plunder. It's our, the success of our studio will, largely depend on how well Plunder Panic does in the marketplace. So, as you mentioned earlier, we don't have an endless budget that we can just, throw at things and see if it sticks. So we hope that Plunder will stick and it will be, something that resonates in the marketplace and players really enjoy it and love it and keep coming back and playing. So we definitely want to continue to invest in Plunder Panic, add additional, DLC to the game. We want to have, potential sequels to the game. Mobile is something that we've had our eyes on. Like, would this game work on mobile? So we are going to be exploring that as well to see if.
Kind of like a pared down, experience, a slightly different reimagining
Exactly.
of it.
Yeah. And, certainly as is traditional in the game industry, we can explore things like sequels and things like that. But we also want to, kind of go back to those other pillars of our studio that we started with. And there may be other great games that we've incubated on the MSU side that we can, or students have created and have an early prototype that shows promise, that we could then bring into the studio here and fill out, rewrite from scratch basically and commercialize. The value of that initial process is that, you're proving out the game, you're proving out that it's fun to play. And sometimes that's one of the hardest things. There are a lot of companies that invest a ton of money building a game all the way to completion and then realize the game's not fun, where, we want to do rapid prototyping, early on and prove it out prior to building it.
Yeah, and students in the MSU program, for some of them, they might have worked on a game for an entire year and it's gone through iterations upon iterations. And then, they have something that could sit on a shelf, but, we see it as like, hey, this game's awesome. Like maybe we could spin this out. Maybe we could spin it out together. And, you talked about Moonshot. I think, when we were whiteboarding this out over Zoom, the big pie in the sky idea was like, what if we could be a studio that really hangs in the Midwest, that people come to MSU to say, hey, maybe this could get us into there. I could graduate and then go here. We can identify talent at MSU. We can give back. We can work on projects with them. So, a big part of it is, there's that relationship. There's that business opportunity. There's kind of, we help you, you help us, where we're identifying talent and then able to provide you with a job. And that talent comes in with these great new ideas and enthusiasm and products that they've worked on. But at the same time, Brian and I love to make games too. So, we're excited about making our own stuff. And who knows, maybe a single player experience with no cross-platform play. That maybe that could be next as a palate cleanser. But go back to easy mode for a little bit. But give us, we'll have the studio, the expertise, the knowledge, the experience to then get to the next big project and make something. At the end of the day, we make stuff that we think is fun, and that is what helps motivate us. So we can tool around, make a cool prototype that we really believe in, and hopefully it'll be a hit.
When we were forming our studio, we knew that going into this with Plunder and doing this multiplayer experience that's accessible, to a wide range of player types, core players and casual players, young players and old players, that's something a little bit unique out there. And, we think there is a niche there for those sorts of games. And, if we're successful with Plunder, I mean, we're still scaling Everest here. Hopefully, we're going to get to the top and and see the sun rising. And hopefully, it'll rise on our studio, and we'll be able to go into that next title and leverage all these experience and that tool chest of things that we built while doing this project.
Well, that confluence of what you've got going on with the students in the program and the origination, and then all of the effort of putting the tool set together and bringing a game to market and all the expertise that's been developed, I think it puts you in this really unique position to fill a spot that we would love to see bloom in the Midwest. So best of luck is sort of that future, and congratulations on everything that is currently out there. And the game is currently available. It's still early access, but it's currently available in Steam. I was just playing it last night again.
Get it, go play it.
Yeah, and that version is probably close to 95% of the finished product. There's a little couple tweaks here and there, but it's a full-fledged game.
It's a game. So if anyone's sort of getting hyped to get a party game going like this kind of thing with a bunch of people, it's there. Go grab it. And there's a Steam sale going on right now, so you got that going for you too.
And I get the feeling if you have like friends and family in your life that aren't gamers, that this could be like a gateway game for them, sort of like,
Well, Brian and I are both dads, and I think there's an allure to making something that you can play with your kids at some point. Mine's still a little too young, but Brian plays with his boys. I think it was his birthday, and he wanted to play Plunder with me and Brian and the dev team. So it's rewarding. It's fun to play it with other people and to see the joy on their faces. That's part of why you do it. It's got a built-in reward, just seeing all the people laughing and having fun.
All right, well, again, congratulations, and thank you very much for coming on. This has been a great conversation. We are really excited to see these new studios that are launching new, interesting, fun ideas. And I really appreciate the behind-the-scenes look. I know that's kind of the purpose of the podcast, but that behind-the-scenes look at sort of the challenges and opportunities in that growth and how you get over that. And hopefully a lot of people are getting some things out of that too. So thanks, Brian. Thanks, Will. And we would love to see, I'll be working on my pirate vocabulary for the, either at launch or just post-launch of the full release of Plunder Panic coming later this year.
Yeah.
Do you know why pirating is so addictive?
Why?
Why is that, Will?
Well, they say once you lose your first hand, you're hooked.
With that, we will say thank you very much. And we will talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye. Take care.
Thank you.
This has been a New Overlords production. For more, please visit newoverlords.com for video, subscribe and feed links, and other ways to help the show.